Stephen's truck was parked half a block from my house with the engine off and two fishing rods sticking out over the tailgate. We looked exactly like two idiots who had gotten lost on the way to a lake. The cooler was in the back. Tackle boxes were stacked behind the seats. My overnight bag was wedged under Stephen's jacket. Everything Hannah had watched me load that morning was still there. I kept staring toward my driveway. "Stop grinding your teeth," Stephen said. "I'm not," I replied through clenched jaw. "You are," he insisted. I leaned back and tried not to look at the clock again. Hannah and I had been married 8 years. No kids, no mansion, no dramatic money. I worked delivery routes and picked up overtime whenever it was available. The house was mine from before the marriage. I had bought it after a few years of living cheap and saying yes to every extra shift I could get. It was a plain 2-bedroom place with an old garage door and a kitchen I had remodeled one cabinet at a time. I had been proud of it. For most of our marriage, Hannah had made it feel like ours. Then, over the previous several months, something changed. She started keeping her phone face down. She took it with her to the bathroom. If I walked into a room while she was texting, her thumb hit the screen before I was close enough to see anything. Then the affection dried up. Kissing became routine, then disappeared. So did the rest of our physical life. At the same time, we started arguing about things that had never mattered before. How I loaded the dishwasher, where I left my work boots, how loud the TV was. The way I chewed once. That was a fun new criticism after 8 years. Eventually, Hannah told me she needed space. "What does that actually mean?" I asked her directly. "I feel crowded," she replied, avoiding my eyes. "I need some room to think." 2 nights later, she suggested I sleep in the guest room. I hated the idea, but I agreed. I told myself that forcing intimacy when she was asking for distance would only make things worse. Mostly, I was afraid of blowing up an 8-year marriage before I understood what was actually wrong. So I moved my pillow down the hall. That was the beginning of me feeling like a visitor in my own house. Then Hannah started talking about fishing. Stephen and I used to go a few times a year. We had not been in months because work kept getting in the way. Suddenly, Hannah thought a weekend at the lake sounded like exactly what I needed. "You and Stephen should go," she told me one evening a little too casually. The first time she mentioned it, I thought she was being nice. Then she kept bringing it up. She wanted to know what time we would leave, which lake we were going to, whether we would have cell reception, whether we were definitely staying overnight, what time I expected to be back Sunday. She tried to make the questions sound casual. They weren't. By Friday night, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know whether something was wrong with Hannah or with me. That mattered. I didn't want to become the guy who accused his wife of cheating because she asked too many questions about a fishing trip. If I was wrong, there was no clean way to take that accusation back. So I said nothing. Saturday morning, Stephen pulled into the driveway at 7. I made a point of loading everything while Hannah could see me through the front window. Rods, cooler, tackle, sleeping bags, overnight bags. If she was planning something, I wanted her absolutely convinced I was leaving. Hannah came outside just before we pulled away. She kissed me on the cheek. "Have fun," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll try," I answered flatly. "What time do you think you'll be back tomorrow?" she asked, and there it was again. "Probably afternoon," I replied, watching her face. She nodded. "Okay, be safe," she said. I looked at her face, hoping I would see something that made me feel stupid for doubting her. I didn't. Stephen and I drove away. I waited until we were several miles out before I told him what had been happening. He listened without interrupting. Stephen jokes about almost everything, but he knows when not to. I told him about the phone, the distance, the guest room, the sudden interest in sending me fishing. When I finished, he kept driving for another minute. Then he glanced over. "You want to know for sure?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "You sure about that?" he pressed. "No," I admitted. "Turn around anyway." So he did. We came back through a different road and parked where we could see my driveway without sitting directly in front of the house. Then we waited. 20 minutes. 30. At 43 minutes, a silver car turned onto my street. An expensive one, clean enough to reflect the houses as it passed. It slowed. Then it pulled directly into my driveway. I stopped breathing. For a second, a man got out. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, nice clothes, expensive-looking watch. The kind of guy who looked like he had never bought shoes because they were marked down 20%. He opened the rear door and took out a small overnight bag. That bag did something to me the car didn't. A man carrying an overnight bag into my house on the exact weekend my wife had worked so hard to send me away was not stopping by to discuss the weather. He walked toward the front door. Before he could properly knock, Hannah opened it. She was already there. Waiting. She smiled at him. Not politely. Not like somebody greeting a coworker. Familiar. He stepped inside, and she closed the door behind him. I reached for the truck handle. Stephen grabbed my forearm. "Let go of me," I told him, my voice low and tight. "No," he replied firmly. "That son of a bitch just walked into my house." "I saw him," he said, not loosening his grip. "With an overnight bag." "I saw that too," Stephen answered steadily. I pulled my arm again. Stephen held on. I wanted to cross the street and kick my own front door open. For months, I had been wondering whether I was imagining things. Now I knew. The strange distance. The guest room. The fishing trip. All of it had an answer. She was cheating. There wasn't anything left to investigate. "Move your hand," I told Stephen through gritted teeth. "If you go in now, you'll get your confrontation," he replied calmly. "That's the idea." "No," he said, "that's the first idea." I stared at him. Stephen looked toward my house. "If you go in there right now, she knows what you know. She starts talking, he starts talking, everybody gets a version." "I don't give a damn about a version," I answered. "You will later," Stephen replied. I looked back at the house. That man was somewhere inside it with my wife. My hands had already started shaking. Stephen tightened his grip on my arm. "We shouldn't be the first people walking through that door," he said deliberately. I turned back toward him. "What the hell does that mean?" Stephen nodded toward the house. "Her parents should," he said simply. I stared at Stephen like he had suggested we burn the house down. "Her parents?" I asked, not sure I had heard him right. "Yes," he replied. "For what?" "So they see it themselves." "I can see it myself." "That's not the point," Stephen answered. He leaned back and rubbed a hand over his jaw. "If you call her dad and say, 'Hannah's cheating on me,' what do you think he does?" "I don't know." "He might call Hannah," Stephen said. That shut me up. Stephen pointed toward the house. "She answers," he continued. "She tells him you're paranoid. That guy walks out the back or through the garage. She fixes the bedroom. Maybe she cries. Maybe she says you've been controlling her for months. By tonight, somehow everybody is discussing your behavior instead of hers." I hated how believable that sounded. Hannah had spent months turning every problem around on me. If I said she was distant, I was needy. If I asked why she kept hiding her phone, I was controlling. If I said sleeping in separate rooms felt wrong, I wasn't respecting her need for space. I had no interest in giving her 2 hours to work on a better explanation. "So what am I supposed to tell them?" I asked. "Something that gets them here without calling her first," Stephen replied. I knew where he was going before he said it. "No. Owen." "No," I repeated. "They haven't done anything to me." "I know," he said quietly. "You want me to scare the hell out of 2 people who have always treated me well." "For a few minutes," he answered. "That's a pretty big few minutes." Stephen pointed through the windshield. "So is what she's doing in there." I swore under my breath. The whole thing felt wrong because it was wrong. There wasn't a clean version of what we were doing. I could storm inside and possibly end up in a screaming match with a stranger. I could call Hannah and watch that silver car disappear before I made it across the street. Or I could drag two innocent people into the ugliest moment of their daughter's marriage with a lie. Stephen's idea was the worst option. It was also the one Hannah couldn't prepare for. "What kind of emergency?" I asked quietly. "Chest pain," Stephen replied without missing a beat. I turned toward him. "You thought of that pretty fast." "I'm not proud of it," he answered honestly. I pulled out my phone. Hannah's father had always been good to me. He had helped me replace a water heater 3 winters earlier and refused gas money. When Hannah and I married, he shook my hand afterward and told me to take care of his daughter. Now I was about to tell him she might be having a heart attack. My thumb hovered over his name. "You sure?" I asked Stephen one last time. "No," he replied, "but if you want them to know the truth without giving Han. Now 10 minutes to prepare them, this is how." I called. Her father answered on the 3rd ring. "Owen," he said, sounding surprised. I made myself speak before I could back out. "Are you near the house?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause. "We're home," he replied. "Why?" "I'm out with Stephen. Hannah called me a few minutes ago. She said her chest hurt, bad, then the call disconnected." My voice shook without me trying. "That part wasn't acting." "Chest pain?" her father asked quickly, his tone immediately alarmed. "That's what she said," I answered. "Now she's not answering. I'm turning around, but we're too far away. Can you get over there, please?" "Did she call 911? He asked urgently. "I don't know," I replied. "I can't reach her." "We're leaving right now," he said without hesitation. I closed my eyes. "Okay. We'll call you when we get there," he replied before hanging up. The call ended. I lowered the phone and stared at it. For a few seconds, neither Stephen nor I said anything. "That was a shitty thing to do," I finally said. "Yeah," Stephen replied simply. I looked at him. He shrugged once. "It was," he added, making no attempt to dress it up. At least he didn't try to make it noble. We waited. Those next minutes were worse than the first wait, because now I had something else to feel guilty about. I pictured Hannah's parents rushing out of their house, imagining their daughter on the floor somewhere. Then my mind went right back to my bedroom, the one Hannah had pushed me out of because she needed space. I wondered whether Derek's overnight bag was sitting on my side of the bed. I wondered if my pillow was still there. I wondered how many times he had already been inside that house. I stopped myself. There was no point inventing details. Reality had already done enough. Stephen checked his mirror. "Car," he said. I turned. Hannah's parents came onto the street faster than normal, then braked hard in front of the house. Her father barely got the car into park. Both doors opened. Her mother was already moving toward the house before he shut his door. They didn't look toward Stephen's truck. They didn't know we were there. They were focused on one thing: their daughter. I felt another wave of guilt. Then I looked at the silver car sitting in my driveway. Her father hurried up the walkway. Her mother was right behind him. Stephen opened his door. "This is it," he said. I got out. My legs felt strangely light, like I had stood up too fast. Ahead of us, Hannah's father reached the front door. He didn't knock. He used the emergency key Hannah had given her parents years earlier. The door opened. Her parents disappeared inside. Stephen and I crossed the street several seconds behind them. Stephen and I were still approaching the front walk when I heard the first scream. It wasn't Hannah. It was her mother. High, shocked, and sharp enough that I stopped moving. A second later, her father started shouting. I couldn't make out the words at first. Just his voice, louder than I had ever heard it. Then something crashed inside the house. For months, I had imagined what catching Hannah would look like. In every version, I was the one opening the door. I was the one standing there while she tried to explain. The real thing sounded worse from outside. Stephen touched my shoulder. "We need to go in," he said. I pulled out my phone. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Recording," I answered. Not because I wanted a souvenir. I wanted a record of who was there and what we were walking into. I had no idea what Hannah would say later. At that point, I didn't trust anything that came out of her mouth. I started recording and followed Stephen inside. The living room looked like somebody had shaken the house. Hannah's mother stood near the hallway with both hands raised, yelling toward the bedroom. Her father was farther in, and Derek was trying to get out. I saw him in pieces at first because my brain didn't put the scene together fast enough. Bare feet, pants pulled on but not fastened, a shirt in one hand, his overnight bag on the floor. Then Hannah behind him, scrambling to cover herself with one of our sheets. That was the part that finished any tiny piece of doubt I still had. There was no story available. No coworker stopping by. No misunderstanding. No innocent explanation. I knew exactly what I was seeing. Hannah saw me. Her face changed. Not guilt first. Fear. "Owen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father turned toward me, then Stephen, then back toward Hannah. "You knew about this?" he demanded, his voice cracking. I didn't answer yet. Hannah's mother pointed at her daughter. "You sent your husband away for this," she shouted. "Mom, stop," Hannah replied sharply. "Everybody needs to calm down." Her mother looked at the sheet wrapped around her daughter and gave one short, bitter laugh. "Calm down," she answered, her voice rising. "You brought another man into Owen's home, into his bedroom after sending your husband away, and you're telling me to calm down." Hannah kept repeating that everybody needed to stop shouting. Nobody listened. Derek finally managed to pull his shirt on. He hadn't buttoned it yet. "I'm leaving," he announced. That was the first thing I heard him say. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just an announcement that he wanted out. My father-in-law stepped in front of him. "You're not walking past me like nothing happened," he told him, blocking the path. Derek raised both hands. "Look, sir, I don't want trouble," he replied carefully. That almost made me laugh. The guy had parked a luxury car in another man's driveway, carried an overnight bag into his house, climbed into bed with his wife, and apparently expected trouble to respect office hours. Hannah moved toward her father. "Dad, please," she said, reaching for his arm. He pointed at her without taking his eyes off Derek. "Stay there," he answered firmly. Derek tried to move around him. Her father blocked him. Stephen stepped farther into the room, partly between me and the mess developing near the hallway. I was still recording. My hand was shaking badly enough that the image on the screen bounced. Derek looked at me then. Really looked at me. I had no idea what Hannah had told him about me. Maybe she said I was passive. Maybe harmless. Maybe clueless. Maybe the husband who would cry, pack a bag, and disappear when she finally decided what she wanted. Whatever he expected, he didn't look comfortable seeing me standing there. He tried the calm voice. "Man, I'm just trying to leave," he told me, spreading his hands. "Then leave," I answered coldly. Hannah snapped my name. "Owen." I looked at her. That one word told me something ugly. Even standing there wrapped in a sheet after being caught by her parents, her husband, and his brother, some part of her still expected me to react when she used that tone. Derek bent down for his bag. Hannah's father moved it aside with his foot. "Leave that for a second," he told him. Derek straightened. "Don't touch my stuff," he replied with an edge in his voice. "Your stuff," her father answered, his voice going dangerously quiet. "You're standing half-dressed in another man's house and you're worried about your stuff." Stephen lifted a hand. "Everybody back up," he said steadily. It was good advice. Nobody took it. Derek reached for the bag again. Hannah's father caught his forearm. Derek jerked free hard enough to send the older man sideways into a small table. That changed the room. I stopped thinking. Stephen moved toward Hannah's father to steady him. I stepped toward Derek. Derek shoved me hard in the chest. I stumbled one step backward. "Don't touch me," I told him, my voice flat. "Then get out of my way," he snapped. "My way," I answered. "You're in my house." He came forward again. Then he threw a wild punch. It caught the side of my face. My ear rang. After that, everything became fast and stupid. I swung once and caught him across the mouth. He staggered back. Stephen grabbed Derek's arm when he tried to lunge forward again. Derek twisted loose and shoved Stephen into the back of a chair. Hannah's father came forward again. A chair tipped. Somebody hit the lamp. It crashed onto the floor. I landed another hard shot when Derek rushed me, and he stumbled sideways into the wall. That was about the extent of it. It wasn't some movie fight. Nobody circled anybody. Nobody traded 10 perfect punches. It was 4 angry men in a cramped room with too much adrenaline and no idea where to put it. Stephen got between us. "Enough," he shouted. I could hear Hannah yelling behind him. "Stop, everybody, stop," she screamed. Her mother was shouting at Hannah to stay out of it. Derek backed toward the front door. His lip was split enough to show a little blood, and one side of his shirt had come untucked again. My cheek throbbed where he had hit me. My hands were shaking. My father-in-law was bent slightly forward, breathing hard. For several seconds, all I could hear was everybody trying to catch their breath. Derek looked toward the door. I knew he wanted to run. Part of me wanted him gone too. But before he could leave, Hannah called to him. "Derek, wait," she said, her voice cracking. That was the first time I heard his name. "Derek." He glanced toward her. Hannah stood several feet away, clutching the sheet to herself. She looked at him the way people look at the last person they think might still be on their side. He didn't go to her. He didn't even answer. That told me plenty. I looked down the hallway. The bedroom door was still open. Our bedroom. My bedroom. A room I had been told I wasn't emotionally welcome in because Hannah needed space. And there she was, standing 10 feet away in one of our sheets, while another man's overnight bag sat on the floor. That was the part I couldn't get past. If she had met him at a motel, it would have ended the marriage. If she had been sneaking around in his car, same result. But this had another layer. She had moved me out first. She had made me sleep down the hall. Then she had encouraged me to leave for an entire weekend. She had asked about the lake, the cell reception, the overnight stay, the time I would return. She hadn't simply cheated. She had made room for him. Literally. Hannah started crying. "Owen, please," she said, reaching a hand toward me. "Please let me explain." I looked at her and felt almost nothing for a second. That scared me more than the anger. Her mother turned toward her. "Explain what?" she demanded sharply. "Mom, you don't understand what our marriage has been like," Hannah replied desperately. I finally answered. "You opened the door before he knocked," I said quietly. Hannah's mouth closed. That line landed harder than I expected because everybody understood what it meant. This wasn't a first mistake. This wasn't something that happened 10 minutes earlier. She had been waiting for him. My father-in-law looked at Hannah. "You knew exactly when he was coming," he said, his voice hollow. Hannah shook her head. "Dad, it's complicated," she insisted. "No," her mother replied firmly. "It really isn't." Derek bent down again and grabbed his overnight bag. Stephen stepped aside so he could get it. "Take your things," Stephen told him evenly. Derek did, but he still didn't leave. Hannah's father stood between him and the door, not attacking him now, just staring. The physical part had burned itself out. Nobody wanted another round. Derek certainly didn't. He stood near the front door with his overnight bag in one hand and his shoes in the other. He had looked like money when he arrived. Now he looked ridiculous. That should have felt satisfying. Mostly I felt tired. My phone was still in my hand. Still recording. I had almost forgotten about it. I looked at the screen and saw how badly my hand was shaking. Behind me, Hannah was crying quietly now. Her mother stood several feet away from her with her arms folded. Stephen remained beside me. Hannah's father looked from his daughter to Derek, then finally toward me. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. The room was a mess. A chair was on its side. The lamp was on the floor. Hannah was wrapped in a sheet. Derek was standing at the door, desperate to leave. 4 people had now seen enough that no explanation would ever put the morning back together. Her father looked at me. There was anger in his face, but also confusion. He had driven across town, believing his daughter might be dying. Now he was standing in my living room after catching her with another man. And I knew there was one more thing I had to tell him before anybody left. I lowered the phone. "There's something you need to know," I said carefully. Hannah's father stared at me. I swallowed. "The heart attack never happened," I told him. "What?" Hannah's father stared at me for a long second. "What?" he asked, his voice going very still. I stopped recording and lowered the phone completely. "There was no chest pain," I answered. "Hannah never called me." His expression went blank. Hannah's mother looked at me. Stephen stayed quiet. Even Derek stopped reaching for the door handle. Hannah stopped crying. Her father took one step toward me. "You lied to me?" he asked. "Yes," I answered without flinching. "You told me my daughter might be having a heart attack." "Yes." There wasn't a decent way to soften it. So I didn't try. "I'm sorry," I told him directly. Hannah suddenly found her voice. "Are you serious?" she asked, her outrage ringing through the room. I looked at her. "You made my parents think I was dying," she demanded. That was the first thing she had said since being caught that carried real outrage. For one second, I almost admired the nerve. Her mother turned sharply toward her. "Hannah, I would be very careful about what you complain about right now," she said icily. Hannah ignored her. "You set this whole thing up," she told me, pointing a finger. "No," I answered calmly. "You set this up. I changed who opened the door." Her father rubbed both hands over his face. I could see that the lie had hurt him. "I hated that part. I didn't know another way to get you here without warning her," I explained. He dropped his hands. "You could have called and told me," he replied quietly. "Telling you and showing you are 2 different things," I answered. Nobody spoke. I continued because if I stopped, I probably wouldn't start again. "If I called and said Hannah was cheating, what happens?" I asked. "Maybe you believe me, maybe you don't, maybe you call her first, she answers, he leaves, then she tells you I'm jealous. Controlling, paranoid, whatever works. She cries, everybody gets a story." Hannah shook her head. "That's insane," she replied. I pointed toward the hallway. "But now you don't need my story," I answered. Her father followed my hand with his eyes. The bedroom door was still open. Derek was still standing near the front door. Hannah was still wrapped in the sheet. "You saw it yourself," I continued. "Both of you did." Her mother looked at Hannah again. Hannah tried another direction. "Our marriage has been bad for months," she said. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. "Yeah," I answered. "Funny how that worked." "What is that supposed to mean?" she asked sharply. "You said you needed space," I replied. "I did," she answered. "So I moved into the guest room." "You agreed to that," she shot back. "Then you started pushing the fishing trip." Hannah looked away. I kept going. "You wanted to know when I was leaving, where we were going, whether we had phone reception, whether we were staying overnight, what time I would be back Sunday." Her father looked at her. Hannah saw it. That was when the argument stopped being between the 2 of us. She wasn't trying to convince me anymore. She was trying to stop her parents from putting the plan together. "It wasn't like that," Hannah said. Her mother stared at her. "Then what was it like?" she asked. Hannah didn't answer. I did. He pulled into the driveway 43 minutes after we left, I said. With an overnight bag, Stephen added from behind me. Hannah looked at him like she hated him. Stephen didn't care. You were spying on our house, she asked me, shifting tactics. My house, I answered. That got another look from her. I wasn't trying to score points. It just came out. Derek shifted near the front door. I really need to leave, he said flatly. Hannah looked at him immediately. Derek, wait, she replied, her voice small. He glanced at her. For the first time since I entered, Hannah looked less worried about me and more worried about him leaving. Maybe she thought he was the next chapter. Maybe she had pictured herself stepping out of my house and straight into whatever life his car and clothes seemed to promise. She was about to learn something. Hannah, Derek said quietly, this isn't the time. Her face changed. This isn't the time, she asked, disbelief creeping into her voice. I'm not doing this here, he replied, already edging toward the door. Her father gave another short, disbelieving laugh. Of course you're not, he said. Derek tried to move around him. Her father blocked him. Stephen stepped farther into the room, partly between me and the mess developing near the hallway. The expensive car, the watch, the clothes, all the things that had probably made him seem impressive when everything was secret. None of them meant much in that room. Hannah stared at him. So you're just leaving, she asked, her voice barely holding together. Derek rubbed his mouth where I had hit him. What do you want me to do? He replied with a shrug. That line did more damage than any speech I could have given. Hannah looked at him like she had expected a different answer. Maybe she expected him to say he loved her. Maybe she expected him to stand beside her. Maybe she just expected him not to abandon her while the consequences were arriving. He gave her nothing. I'll call you, Derek said, already turning away. Hannah didn't answer. My father-in-law stepped away from the door. Go, he told Derek, his voice like stone. Derek did. He opened the front door and walked outside carrying his overnight bag and shoes. Nobody followed him. Nobody needed to. A few seconds later, we heard the silver car start. Then it pulled away. Hannah stood there staring toward the window. For the first time, she seemed to understand that he was actually gone. No grand declaration. No promise to come back for her. No offer of a new home. Just taillights. Her mother noticed too. So that's him, she asked Hannah, her voice tight. That's what this was worth. Mom, please, Hannah replied quietly. No, her mother said. Don't Mom please me. Her father sat down heavily on the edge of a chair. He looked exhausted. Then he turned toward me. I'm angry at you for lying to us, he said. I understand, I replied. But I understand why you did it, he added after a moment. Hannah turned toward him. Dad, she said, reaching for him. He raised one hand. No, he replied, and that single word stopped her cold. He looked at me again. You should not have told us she was having a medical emergency, he said evenly. I know, but what we found when we got here is not your fault, he replied. Hannah started crying harder. Her father looked at her. You planned this, he told her. Hannah shook her head. Dad, you don't know everything, she answered. I know enough, he said simply. That seemed to take some of the fight out of her. I looked at Hannah. Get what you need for tonight, I told her. Her head snapped up. What? You're not staying here. Owen, come on, she replied, stepping toward me. No. We need to talk. We've been talking for months, I answered. Apparently you were also scheduling. Stephen looked down, probably hiding a reaction. Hannah's mother stepped toward her daughter. You're coming with us, she said, leaving no room for argument. Hannah looked from her mother to her father, then back to me. Please don't do this, she said. I almost asked which part she meant. Making her leave. Ending the marriage. Refusing to pretend I hadn't watched another man walk into my house with an overnight bag. Instead, I said the only thing that mattered. The marriage is over. Hannah stood there for a moment, waiting for me to take it back. I didn't. Her mother went with her to the bedroom, so she could change and pack a few immediate things. Her father remained in the living room with Stephen and me. Nobody said much. There wasn't anything useful left to say. About 10 minutes later, Hannah came back carrying a small bag. She had changed clothes. She looked smaller somehow. Not innocent, just suddenly aware she was no longer controlling what happened next. Her parents took her with them. I watched their car disappear around the corner. Then I went down the hallway and stopped outside my bedroom. For weeks, I had slept in the guest room because Hannah told me she needed space. Now the house was quiet. Nobody was going to tell me where I was allowed to sleep in my own home. I didn't touch the bed. I sat in the chair beside the dresser instead. Then I pulled out my phone. The next call I made was to a divorce attorney. The divorce was less dramatic than the Saturday morning that caused it. That was probably for the best. I left a message for the attorney that afternoon and met with him the following week. I brought the recording from the confrontation, a written timeline, information about the house, and everything I could remember about the weeks leading up to the fishing trip. He listened, asked questions, took notes, and reacted to the affair a lot less than I expected. Lawyers, I learned, have a useful habit of caring about documents more than outrage. The first thing he made clear was that Hannah cheating on me did not mean she automatically lost everything. I already knew life wasn't a television show, but I was angry enough that part of me wanted a judge to look at what she had done and stamp a piece of paper saying she gets nothing. That wasn't how it worked. The house mattered because I had purchased it before the marriage. My name was on the original purchase records. I had already owned and lived in it before Hannah and I married. At the same time, we had been married 8 years, and marital contributions made during those years still had to be considered under the law that applied to us. My attorney went through all of that instead of promising me some fantasy result. His basic point was simple. Hannah could demand whatever she wanted. Ownership records, financial records, marital contributions, and state law would determine what she actually received. That was fine with me. I wasn't trying to steal anything that legally belonged to her. I just wasn't voluntarily handing over the home I had worked years to buy, because she had decided another man looked better in my bedroom. I filed quickly. Hannah hired her own attorney. Then the story changing started. At first, she argued that I had manipulated the confrontation. Technically, she was right about one part. I had manipulated how her parents arrived. I had lied about a medical emergency. I wasn't proud of it, and I never pretended otherwise. But there was a problem with using that lie to erase what they found. Her parents had entered with their own emergency key. They were inside before Stephen and I entered. They saw Hannah and Derek themselves. Stephen had watched Derek arrive. I had watched Derek arrive. We both saw the overnight bag. The recording established who was present during the immediate aftermath and captured enough of the confrontation to prevent the morning from becoming some vague disagreement about what supposedly happened. Hannah could argue about my method. She couldn't turn 4 witnesses into a hallucination. Her mother knew. Her father knew. Stephen knew. I knew. That became important outside the legal process, too. Hannah tried telling her parents the affair happened because our marriage had already broken down. Her mother apparently asked whether broken marriages normally required checking a husband's fishing schedule. I heard that from my former father-in-law later. I didn't laugh when he told me. I wanted to. Hannah also tried leaning on the idea that Derek had swept her into something she hadn't really planned. That didn't survive the facts either. Confused people do not repeatedly ask what time their husband is leaving for a fishing trip. They do not ask whether he will have cell reception. They do not confirm that he is staying overnight. They do not arrange for another man to arrive less than an hour after the husband leaves. And they definitely do not open the front door before he gets a proper knock-in. That last detail stayed with her father. He mentioned it more than once. The door had already been opening. That was what made him understand this wasn't some spontaneous disaster. Derek had been expected. As for Derek, he proved even less useful to Hannah than I expected. I never contacted him. I didn't need to. From what eventually reached me, once the secrecy disappeared, so did most of his enthusiasm. He stopped coming around. Calls became less frequent. Whatever promises had sounded exciting when Hannah was sneaking around behind my back apparently became a lot less appealing when she was separated, staying with her parents, talking to divorce lawyers, and expecting him to stand beside her. He didn't offer her a new house. He didn't sweep her into some luxurious replacement life. He created distance. The last clear picture I wanted of Derek was the one I already had. Him walking out of my house carrying his overnight bag and his shoes. Hannah stayed with her parents for several weeks before eventually getting a small apartment. Those weeks were rough between them. They did not disown her. They were still her parents. But there is a difference between loving somebody and believing them. Hannah had apparently expected them to instinctively defend their daughter. Instead, they had been the first people through the door. Her mother had seen her scrambling to cover herself. Her father had seen Derek half-dressed in the house. There was no version Hannah could give them stronger than their own memory. A couple of months into the divorce process, Hannah called me. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. I know I hurt you, she said quietly. I waited. What I did was wrong, she continued, especially bringing him into the house. That sounded close to a real apology. For about 30 seconds. Then the explanation started growing conditions. I was lonely, she said. We hadn't been communicating. I was confused about what I wanted. I listened until she used the word confused again. Hannah, I said, cutting in carefully. Confused people don't ask what time their husband is leaving for a fishing trip. She went quiet. I continued. They don't ask where he's going, whether he has reception, and exactly when he's coming home. You planned around me. That doesn't mean I didn't care about you, she replied softly. I'm sure you cared about a lot of things, I answered. She started crying. Months earlier, that sound would have made me rush to fix whatever was wrong. Now I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the cabinet door I had installed slightly crooked 6 years earlier. I had been meaning to fix it ever since. Funny what becomes important after a marriage ends. Is there really no chance we can stop this? Hannah asked, her voice breaking. We could try counseling. No, I answered. Not angrily. Just no. Do you hate me? She asked. I thought about it. No, I replied. I just believe you now. She didn't say anything for several seconds. Then the call ended. The rest of the divorce was paperwork. Meetings, financial disclosures, property discussions, attorney emails, signatures. There were arguments over money. There were disagreements about what counted as marital property and how contributions should be treated. But there was no magical courtroom punishment. Hannah kept what legally belonged to her and received what the law required. I kept what legally belonged to me. The house stayed with me after the ownership history, financial records, and applicable property rules were worked through. It wasn't because some judge decided adultery meant Hannah forfeited everything she had ever touched. It was because I had owned the house before the marriage, and after the financial and legal issues were resolved, she had no basis to simply take the home because she wanted it. That distinction mattered to me. I didn't need magic revenge. I needed reality to hold. The final paperwork arrived months after the Saturday morning when her parents walked through my front door. No music. No courtroom applause. Just documents. I read every page twice. Then I signed. Hannah signed as well. 8 years of marriage ended on paper long after it had already ended inside my bedroom. When my attorney sent confirmation that the divorce was final, I sat at my desk for a while and looked around the house. It was still mine. The walls looked the same. The kitchen still had the crooked cabinet. The guest room door was open down hall. Nothing looked victorious. That was fine. I had stopped needing it too. Several months after the divorce became final, I was still living in the same house. I still worked the same delivery job. The kitchen cabinet was still crooked. Some things survive everything. I slept in my bedroom. The guest room went back to being a guest room. Clean sheets. A lamp. A dresser with almost nothing in it. Stephen stayed there once after we drank too much while watching a game, which was probably the first time the room had actually been used for its intended purpose in years. I never stood in the doorway thinking about symbolism. It was just nice not having somebody else decide where I belonged in my own house. There were still bad days. Sometimes I would come home from work, turn into the driveway, and remember the silver car sitting there. Other times I would wake up and forget for a second that I was divorced. Those moments passed. I stopped checking the past for an explanation that would somehow make it less ugly. There wasn't one. Hannah had made a series of choices. Once I finally understood them, I made mine. Hannah and I barely spoke after the divorce. There was nothing left that required regular contact. I heard pieces of her life through other people, mostly because our families had been connected for 8 years, and those connections do not disappear as neatly as a court filing. Her relationship with her parents stayed damaged. They loved her. Of course they did. But they had seen too much. Her father seemed to have the hardest time with it. For him, the affair itself was bad enough. What bothered him almost as much was the planning. Hannah had not simply made one reckless choice. She had moved me into another room, encouraged me to leave for the weekend, checked my schedule, then brought Derek into the house after I left. Her father had trouble making that fit with the daughter he thought he knew. Derek never became her replacement husband. Whatever fantasy existed between them collapsed quickly once secrecy, convenience, and excitement disappeared. He moved on. Hannah eventually had to build whatever came next without me and without him. My former father-in-law and I still talked occasionally. Nothing dramatic. Sometimes he called to ask how I was doing. Once we met for coffee. We talked about work, his truck, a baseball game, and almost nothing about Hannah. That was probably why it worked. We didn't need to pretend that Saturday morning had never happened. We also didn't need to make it the only thing we ever discussed. Stephen, naturally, waited until enough time had passed before bringing up the fishing trip. "You know," he said one Saturday, leaning back with a grin, "we still never caught any fish." "We never reached the lake," I replied. "Technicality," he answered with a shrug. He asked if I wanted to try again. I agreed. So we finally took the fishing trip. We had loaded the truck for months earlier. We packed the rods, the cooler, the tackle boxes, the overnight gear. Then we drove away. Nobody stood in my doorway asking exactly what time I was leaving. Nobody needed to know whether my phone would have reception. Nobody asked whether we were definitely staying overnight. Nobody needed an exact time for when I would return. We just left. Sitting beside the water that evening, Stephen asked me something I had been asked a few times since the divorce. "Do you feel like you won?" he asked, looking out at the water. I thought about it. "No," I answered honestly. Stephen nodded. He understood. That was the truth. I didn't win a prize. I lost an 8-year marriage. I lost the version of Hannah I thought I had married. I lost years I could not get back. Getting her parents into that house didn't erase any of it. What it did was make the truth impossible to bury. Hannah had expected me to quietly move into the guest room, while another man slowly took my place. For a while, I did move into that room because I thought giving my wife space might help save the marriage. Once I knew what that space was really for, I stopped giving ground. I didn't need to destroy Hannah's entire life. I didn't need Derek ruined. I didn't need everybody in town to know what happened. I needed the truth to stand where the people who mattered could see it. Then I needed to leave the marriage without letting Hannah rewrite why it ended. That happened. These days, the guest room is just a guest room again. The bedroom is mine. The house is quiet. My life is different from the one I thought I was building. Smaller in some ways, but at least it belongs to me. I didn't win anything. I simply stopped losing,